Well, thank you once again for joining me here at Pastor's Positive Mental Health Institute. It's always good to talk about the church and to have wonderful guests on who have had some experience under their belt and still have a smile on their face. And so I'm really happy to have Tom Eggerbrecht with us today. And here's the thing, I'm going to let him tell us about himself, but I would encourage you, if you find this podcast valuable and the content here, please like, share, and subscribe so we can help the church build itself up in love and help it flourish. So without delay, let's just get into it. Tom, thanks so much for being with us. What I'd like to, with me, I guess, with us, but if other people are listening, that makes us plural. But I would first like to hear kind of what led you into the ministry, maybe some of your ministry path, and then we'll get into a little bit later about what you're currently doing in ministry. But just kind of give us it's all yours now. Give us some time.
Oh, thanks, Kirk. Great to be on this podcast. I love what you do. I think it's very important. It's an important part of ministry to be able to uplift and help and support and encourage pastors and other church workers. It's kind of a passion of mine in the role that I now serve. But it's been a passion really ever since I've been a church worker, a pastor, which is now well over 30 years. So I'll go back to, I guess, to the beginning. I'm not one of those people who, knew when they were 6 years old that they were going to be a pastor. Not at all. I toyed with all different types of things that I thought that I might want to do with life. But having said that, as we were talking about before we started recording the podcast, Kirk, I was born and raised in the church, baptized as an infant, went to Lutheran schools my entire life, except for one year when I was in kindergarten. Other than that, I went to Lutheran grade school, Lutheran high school, Concordia University, Mequon, Wisconsin, and then Concordia Seminary, St. Louis. So I am what you call a product of the system for sure. But as I said, I never really made a conscious decision, I'm going to be a pastor. It was kind of one of those things that my parents every once in a while would encourage or put a little thought in my mind that maybe you want to consider that someday. My dad was a lifelong professor and academic dean at Concordia, Wisconsin, served there the majority of his career. My mom was a nurse, but both brought me up in the faith, brought me up in the church, saw to it that I went to Lutheran schools and all the rest of that. By the time I got to college, I started in the pre-seminary program and then kind of was in and out of it throughout my 4 years of college. And by the time I graduated, I was out of it. I took a class in public relations my senior year of college and just loved it and loved the prof and thought that I wanted to take that as a career path. So I decided to take a year off after graduating from college and started to move into the working world. I worked for a savings and loan in those days, and at the same time was involved in my church and really wasn't, completely sure what I was going to do. I really thought I wanted to go into public relations, but if you remember in those days, we didn't have the kind of interns that kids have the internships that kids have these days. And so no matter what job I would apply for, they would always say, your resume looks good and all that, but we were really looking for somebody who has at least 2 years experience. And I remember thinking, how am I ever going to get 2 years of experience if nobody will ever hire me? So in the course of that year, I was actively involved at my church and especially active in leading the youth group as a lay volunteer. And throughout the course of that year, my pastor would sit down with me a couple times and ultimately one time and said, Tom, you really ought to apply for the seminary. You've been through most of the pre-sem education. You took your Greek, all the rest of that. Um, and so I said, okay, I'll apply. We'll see what happens. And you know how that goes. The next thing you know, I was accepted. The next thing I knew, my wife had a job in St. Louis. The next thing I knew, we had an apartment. And the next thing I knew, I was taking a 7-week crash course in Hebrew with Andy Bartelt at the St. Louis Seminary. And so that kicked it all off and made my way into 4 wonderful years of seminary, made great friends, had wonderful profs, and really went all in and thought, yeah, this is where I was meant to be. This is where I should be.
Yeah. Well, there is a little public relations involved in pastoral ministry, so that all wasn't for nothing. Just a quick note before we just carry on. I just want to encourage anyone who's listening that has kids. As a parent, it's important you have great influence on your children, and there's no I mean, we know the doctrine of vocation is wherever you go, you're going to actually be a missionary to share the gospel of the Lord, but at the same time, we also need people to equip those people to go do that. And so, take your kids to church, talk to them about Jesus, talk to them about God's call upon their life, and that they would consider it as an option. So that's wonderful. So you've graduated seminary. Tell us about the churches that you've served.
Yeah, I feel very blessed to have had really a multitude, well, maybe not a multitude, but some various experiences in the parish and in ministry. I actually served my vicarage at a congregation in Northern Virginia, Falls Church, Virginia, inside the Beltway, Washington, D.C. area. And so that was a great experience, just in terms of a vicarage, being able to be in a metropolitan area like that. I'm a big city person. I love the experience. I had an incredible vicarage supervisor. And so wouldn't you know it, I get my first call and it was to rural Western North Carolina, of all places. As I said, I was born and raised in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, suburban Milwaukee. So I was used to the city, northern boy, and they send me to the south in a rural situation,
Of
which
course.
was, I got to tell you, the people there are salt of the earth, wonderful, wonderful people. Still have some friends there to this day that we keep in touch with. Spent a couple of years there, um, and got the lay of the land as an assistant, as an associate pastor there. And lo and behold, my vicarage congregation from Northern Virginia decided that they wanted to end their vicarage program and call an associate pastor. And so they called me back to be their associate pastor after only a couple years in North Carolina. It was a difficult decision because I hadn't been there that long, but I really knew the situation in Northern Virginia, and so I ended up accepting the call and took the call to Northern Virginia as an associate pastor. Loved the people there. Loved the opportunity to be back in a large metropolitan area. My wife and I actually started a Lutheran preschool while we were there. And our children were very young at the time. Our daughter ended up attending that preschool. I think our son even did as well. And we served there for about 5 years until I got a call back to Milwaukee, Wisconsin, to an urban congregation, Mount Calvary Lutheran Church, right in the city, in an urban area. And it was something. It was a type of ministry that I didn't think I would ever be suited for. However, I was ready to take on a situation where I would be on my own or I would be a senior pastor at that point in my ministry. And so I didn't think I was going to take the call. And I said to my wife, we ought to at least go visit and see whether this is something the Lord is leading us to or not. And so we flew out to Milwaukee, visited there, and I just was the only thing I can say is the Holy Spirit was leading the whole time. Just was overwhelmed with the music ministry there, with the historic nature of the church, with the fact that they had a grade school, 4 years old through eighth grade, and said, you know what, I can't deny the fact that I really feel that the Lord is calling me to this place. And so we accepted that call, and I really consider that to be really the main parish service of my entire ministry because I ended up spending about 15 years there. Both our children went through the school all the way. It was, as I said, it was an urban ministry, so it was completely different from rural Western North Carolina. It was different from suburban metropolitan DC in that it was definitely not just a changing neighborhood, it was a changed neighborhood. And yet, the really cool thing about that congregation to this day, they're celebrating their 100th anniversary this year, and I'm going to be going to preach there in a couple months for their one of their celebrations. But one of the really cool things about that congregation is that they have decided over the years at various points, we don't care what happens to the neighborhood around us, we're going to stay here and serve this community. And so school choice came in. It was a huge boon for the school. To this day, the school is filled mostly to capacity, mainly an African American population there in the school and in the area. The congregation remains mostly Caucasian, white. But one of the things that we try to do is be very intentional about our ministry to and with and for the school, and having the school also minister to the members of the congregation, which was a really, really cool dual dynamic that was taking place while we were there. So after about 15 years, oh, and I should say, by the way, too, one of the great things I've already mentioned Concordia University. During that time, I got to serve as an adjunct professor of theology at Concordia Mequon for about 13 of those 15 years while we were there. And it was one of my great joys in life to be able to teach college students. Man, every time I walked on that campus, it was just energizing. I just loved teaching and being with college students. It was just kind of a breath of fresh air in the middle of a difficult and yet fulfilling ministry. So we spent about 15 years there, as I said. Our kids grew up there. Both went to school 9 hours away in two different directions. We're never going to come back to Milwaukee, and just felt like it was probably time that that Mount Calvary have a new pastor and that we, serve somewhere else in ministry. Never put that word out there, but ended up getting a call to Castleberry, Florida, which is suburban Orlando, which is where I live now in Winter Springs, Orlando, or Winter Springs, Florida, I should say. Accepted the call there and served at Ascension in Castleberry for about 7.5 joyful years. Really just so again now back to suburban ministry. So we had rural, southern, we had huge metropolitan, we had urban, and then we had suburban. So the Lord really kind of gave me the gamut of
Yeah.
types of ministry as I went. And the big thing that we did there in ministry was really integrating with the community and really serving alongside and serving our community in various different ways, which was really a joyful time in ministry to be able to get out there and serve alongside other pastors in the community, doing things for our community, and then also really being embedded and integrated into the community and seeing how that played out while we were there. So it was a great span of 4 different parishes until then I finally received a call to serve as a vice president of ministry solutions for Lutheran Church Extension Fund, and then a little over a year ago got a promotion to be the senior vice president of ministry solutions for Lutheran Church Extension Fund.
Oh, that's great. One thing that I find really encouraging, and if we could encourage other pastors, is every parish you went to, you can't just replicate what you did at the last parish. You have to go,
That's
okay,
for
what's
sure.
what's necessary for this community, what's the identity of this church, and then stick to that, right? And do it well. I think often pastors can fall into the trap of taking past experience at another church and thinking they just need to go do it there, and often that doesn't work very well. And it's so I really appreciate how, you're like, let's look at this and let's figure out who we're going to be. And that's great. So can you tell me about a time, so 22 and a half, 23 years in pastoral ministry. Can you tell me about a time when you've been built up in ministry?
Yeah, the minute that you say that, I think back to one specific moment. It actually was 28 years in the parish, but it was at my most recent parish here in the Orlando area. One of our members took me out to lunch, as he would do periodically. Uh, a very, just a strong leader, owns his own business. Um, Served in leadership capacities in the church. Just a very, well-heeled person, very much a churchman in the church, and took me out to lunch one day. It was really just to catch up with each other, to talk about our families and all that. And the one thing that stuck with me and sticks with me to this day is that at the very end of our conversation, it was just a casual conversation, but we were just, pretty much getting ready to leave. He paid the bill, and he just said, "Now, Pastor, is there anything I can do for you? Is there anything that I can do to serve you or to help you or to support you?" And there may not have been anything at that moment, but the very fact that he just said that, and it wasn't just an off the cuff thing, it was very sincere, and I could tell that he meant it. If I would have said, whatever it was, I would have said, make a donation, or, help me in this leadership position or whatever. I'm convinced he would have done it because it was just sincere. He was there to help and serve and support. I will always remember that one little question as a way of showing his support for me as an individual.
Wow. And that's one of the things in my work. It doesn't take a lot, and I think hopefully that's one thing that people are hearing. First of all, he paid for lunch. That's important to church members, anyway. No, sorry, but he paid for lunch. But I think that you mentioned that you were just catching up. You had relationship with him, almost a friend like relationship, I would say. And so when he was able to pose that question at the end of your conversation, it meant something because you knew it was sincere and you knew it came from a place of someone who truly loved you and wanted what was best for you. And so I think that, again, what I try to tell people when I present is that pastors aren't that difficult. It doesn't take a lot. But it does take intention and it does take sincerity. And so I really love that. So over the years, so you said 28 years, so forgive me for
No.
ripping 5 years off of your illustrious pastoral career. No, but what can you tell me, what have you found maybe to be one of the greatest challenges in ministry?
It's interesting because I've both experienced it, and now that I have an opportunity to work with pastors literally all over the country over the past 6 years or so, I've been able to see it from a different perspective as well. Um, so there are a number of things that I think about that are challenges for pastors these days. One of which I think is simply loneliness. I think a lot of pastors are lonely. And I see my role in my current position as somebody who not only supports my team members that work for me at LCEF, but when I have the opportunity to work with pastors, I want to make sure that I leave them feeling encouraged. And often all that takes, as you said earlier, Kirk, often all that takes is to just sit down in their office and listen. I can't tell you the number of times or the number of pastors that I've worked with that, we're working on a ministry clarity process, like a strategic planning process, or working on a campaign to raise funds or dollars for the congregation. And somehow or other, throughout the process, I end up in the pastor's office working on something, and the conversation just turns. And they just kind of unload something that's on their mind, or some burden they're carrying at that time, or something that really is weighing on them. And they just need a listening ear. And so, one of the challenges I think pastors are facing these days is just being lonely and just having somebody to be that listening ear, somebody that will be there to listen to them. I think it's all part of this whole social media culture that we now live in. The fact that we're connected to so many different people, but it's so artificial. And so people are craving a very real, very personal connection. Even if it's only with one or two different people, it's something that I think pastors, really need. And having to do with that also, I think another challenge that pastors face in this very transient society is just kind of a lack of loyalty from their members oftentimes. I can remember some of the most hurtful times in my parish ministry were when, for weeks and months, there would be this family or this couple that was in church week after week after week after week, and then suddenly they left. And I never knew why. Why did you leave? Was it something I said? Was it something I did? And it may not have been. It just may not have been, for their ministry. But, it's hurtful when those kinds of things happen, or even worse, when you have a friend in the congregation and they end up leaving, maybe telling you why they left, but just kind of that lack of loyalty, I think, is a difficult thing that pastors and church leaders often face.
Yeah. And often when people do leave, I would say even the lack of loyalty is consistent fellowship. If you look at Barna's research, 1.6 times a month is considered regular church attendance.
Yeah.
And how do you really get connected to a community, and how do you really help your parishioners be equipped for the work of the ministry if they're only exposed 1 hour a week or a month, basically an hour and a half a month. And so that's a challenge that we have. But I always find that unilateral decisions, when people just leave and they don't tell you, is like, well, thanks for letting me be part of that decision, and so that's hard for us. And it's hard to be friends with people in the church. And I know that seminaries often warn against it. And I'm not saying that pastors need to be friends with everybody, but they need to have a friend.
Yep.
Sometimes that friend, I've experienced it, it sounds like you have too. Sometimes that friend does leave, but that doesn't mean that we close up and let our hearts get hardened and don't. And because what happens is we find ourselves not just being alone, but we isolate. And isolation can be just very dangerous for the pastor, really for any of us. I think we noticed that during the pandemic, people were isolated and it was not good. And that's why we have these conversations, really like we're having now, about mental health, because it got exposed that we need to be in fellowship with one another, and we need to put away the false connections, as you call it, that are artificial, right? Like you said. And that's really difficult. So how have, in those challenges that you've experienced, how have church members helped fulfill and meet some of those challenges?
Yeah. So, going back to the story I told you, that's one way, that just a question that said to me, I'm here for you.
Yeah.
If any way that a member can communicate that, to say, I'm here to help you, I'm here to support you, I'm not here to criticize, I'm here to encourage. It's just such a huge help. And sometimes I really liked it. It meant a lot to me because I think one of my love languages is the love language of gifts, or giving, or receiving. And so just a tangible handwritten note or small gift cannot tell you how far that, at least for me, how far that went or how far that goes. Like other pastors I've talked to, I had a top drawer in my desk where I would literally keep the notes, the encouraging, supportive notes that people in my congregation would send to me or would hand to me on the way out of church. And having a bad day or having a day where I just needed some encouragement, I would open up that drawer and I would look at those notes, and man, that would be just an incredible boost. And another thing I think that sometimes gets overlooked is that parishioners can not only help and serve and support the pastor himself, but man, it goes a long way if they help and serve and support the pastor's wife and the pastor's family as well.
Yeah.
Just to encourage them as the ones who are, kind of behind the scenes, holding up the pastor, helping him at home, kind of hearing, the some of the struggles of ministry, and just saying, we're here not only to help and serve and support our pastor, but we want to support his entire family. And so I think that's a really, really helpful thing for people to do.
Yeah. No, and I think it doesn't, like you said, it doesn't take a lot, but it does take what I've discovered is what's called genuine care. It's not just, oh, hey, thanks, pastor, or, here's a note, I'm glad you're my pastor, which is good, but it's like, here's why.
Right.
Or, I heard you needed something, I overheard it, and here's how I can provide that for you. And, I find that for me, people ask more about my wife than they do about me and how she's doing, and that blesses me because to your point, we come home and we can't and nor should we share everything that we as people spiritually vomit on us. We shouldn't share all of that with our spouses, but they can sense the burden that we're carrying, and they're there at 2 o'clock in the morning. We get the phone call that someone's in the hospital or someone's committed suicide. They're there watching us carry that burden. And though we know Jesus is carrying it ultimately, it still weighs heavy upon us. And so that's a good word for people. I mean, it blesses me when my wife is blessed by the congregation, and so look out for pastors' wives and for their children. Offer babysitting, offer date nights, and I know a lot of churches do that, but it means a lot, and it's a simple, in my opinion, simple way to help your pastor be the best he can be for the work that he's called to do. So I'd like to move on to LCEF. So as you said, Lutheran Church Extension Fund, you are the Senior Vice President of Ministry Solutions. That's a beautiful title, but what does it mean?
Yeah, great. Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity. LCEF, for those who don't know, is the organization of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod that helps and serves and supports congregations through taking investments of people in the pews and turning those investments around and loaning them out to congregations for various ministry purposes, whether it would be for construction of a new church building or a school building or a renovation or ministry or whatever it might be. And so that is the main focus of what we do. And then at the same time, LCEF is a ministry of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. And so it behooves us to help and support congregations to stay healthy and thrive and be well in ministry. And so my department serves congregations really in three specific ways. First, maybe even four or five, but three main, and then a couple on the side as well. One, we help congregations with what we call ministry clarity. So we help congregations do strategic planning so that they come up with a ministry plan, a campus plan, and a financial plan that helps them move forward in ministry for the next 3 to 5 years. Sometimes that leads to opportunities for a congregation to grow or to renovate or to expand or to build something new. And so in those situations, and even if it isn't the result of a ministry clarity experience, sometimes congregations just say, we're ready to build and we need LCEF's help. So we will help congregations by running what we call a ministry expansion campaign, what most people would call a capital campaign. But we call it a ministry expansion campaign because ministry is at the forefront of the campaign that we run. So it's not just about dollars. It's involving people in the ministry and life of the congregation and growing that ministry by growing disciples through the whole process so that the result is not only growth in dollars, but growth in disciples and growth in ministry. And then we also do a number of different stewardship processes. We also serve agencies in the synod, like schools and camps and different things like that. And then also, as we alluded to earlier, Grace Place Wellness is part of my team. Greg Walton, former district president of the Florida Georgia District, is the vice president for Grace Place at LCEF. And Grace Place is a ministry that all we do is serve and support pastors in any way that we can to see to it that they are well to serve for ministry. And so one of the things that we're doing, I could just say right now, is we're currently in our second round of giving out some sabbatical grants. This year, I believe they're going to be $7,500 grants. And I think the process is already open. And if it isn't, it will be open soon. And you can simply go to our website at lcef.org and find all the materials there that will help you apply for a potential grant to help you get a sabbatical for your ministry.
That's great. One thing I would encourage people to do is if you go onto there to look up under Grace Place Wellness, from LCEF, the wellness wheel, which so if you're interested, Dr. Greg Walton has been on this podcast, I think about a year ago, so you can go search through it and find it to hear more about Grace Place Wellness. And it's interesting because over the last year, there's been a little bit of a move of maybe different emphasis that Grace Place Wellness has had. And what I really appreciate about Greg, he's like, where's the pulse and where can we serve best? Let's not just look at what we've done, but how do we expand? How do we move forward? How do we shift with the needs of the church? But the wellness wheel has actually been very, very instrumental in my life because it really talks about baptismal identity. And I really encourage, in fact, I just finished a workbook for catechism that I'm going to start in September. And the wellness wheel is right towards the end. And I want, to show people why, as we're talking about baptism, why it's so important. And that's great. And so really LCEF is more than just the LCMS's bank. I mean, that's really how a lot of people say it,
Right.
but ministry is really the heart behind LCEF. And I really appreciate you saying that because I think sometimes people think, oh, it's just another lending institution. Well, it's a lot more than that. In fact, if somebody was on from LCEF on your podcast a couple times ago on Grace Place Wellness and talked about the new initiative that they're raising money so they can loan, lower interest rate mortgages for pastors. So I might be talking to you all soon about that. But that's encouraging. And what I loved about what he said was the understanding that pastors maybe don't have the best credit because they're under this debt from school and from other things, and they typically don't take we're not the highest paid people in our positions a lot of times, and so that's not what makes our decision for the call. And so I really appreciate that there's actually a ministry that wants to get pastors into homes because that really helps your congregation too. When you can afford a home, that means that you actually want to plant a little more roots in that, and it's
Right.
and so I think that I'm really excited about that. But let me just ask you this because it's been something that so Grace Place Wellness was a ministry for years before LCEF absorbed it, purchased it, however that looks out like. But what do you think led Lutheran Church Extension Fund to say this would be a worthy thing to have in our portfolio?
Great question. I think the main thing, as Bart Day, our CEO, says it or tells it, is that it's for obviously it's of our benefit to see to it that the congregations of synod are strong moving forward, because a strong congregation is a congregation that's not only going to have people who are investing their dollars in LCEF, but also probably growing and expanding and having the need for taking out loans and so forth. So it's our benefit to see to it that the LCMS is filled with well workers. So it's of our benefit. It's kind of a self-interest, but beyond that, it's simply, as you said earlier, Kirk, our ministry focus. We want to make sure at LCEF that the LCMS is strong moving forward. And the LCMS is going to be strong moving forward if it has pastors who are strong and well and take their wellness seriously. And so Grace Place really is all about doing that. And to your point a little earlier, one of Greg's emphases and one of the things that you and I were talking about a little earlier today is the fact that there's all this emphasis on church worker wellness. You know, we can remove a pastor from a congregation and give him a sabbatical or, give him a vacation or whatever. But he's got to come back to a culture that's going to help and serve and support him. And so Greg's emphasis has been, how are we going to help congregations, lay people and lay leaders, see to it that there is a healthy culture in the congregation for that pastor to serve? And so that's one of the great benefits that we offer up at LCEF and through Grace Place, is simply to do that. And it's one of the reasons why we acquired Grace Place.
Yeah, and that what you just mentioned is a challenge because, like I had mentioned to you before, the book that I wrote was a small book, easy, accessible, is for the church member, so that they can see here's practical ways that I can support the pastor. Nothing, it's not, you don't have to do cartwheels in front of them or anything, but how do you get that into the hands of the parishioner to where they'll value it? And I know that one of the hearts that one of the things on Greg's heart was to how do you have teams of people who their sole purpose is to care for the pastor's mental health and their well-being. Not an elder necessarily, it could be on that committee, but not, and it's just for, and I don't know how is that going. I have to probably talk to Greg about it, but I know at one point he was like, and the pastor's the one that's going to pick them, but I mean, I think that that's a wise thing, is there's people that all their sole purpose in the church is to go, how is that person doing? How is that church worker doing? How can I make sure that they are doing the best they can? And that means being sensitive to, hey, you seem a little, having a relationship, you seem a little bit different today. Is everything okay? How can I help? And so I think, again, we get busy, our congregations get busy, and they sometimes fall into the trap that think that our jobs are only a couple hours a week as pastors. And really, I had one gal tell me yesterday, she goes, well, pastors are really never off. They really don't have a day off. And I'm like, well, yeah, you're right. And I teach and I preach it. I'm not very great at taking days off. I'll be the first to admit that. And so, but I think that being aware of that and saying, okay, how do I protect? I want to love coming to the church. I want to love driving to it. I want to love the people that I get to do. And so, how do I make sure that I do that? So, as we wrap this up, we could talk a long time, Tom. I just appreciate your experience, your thoughtfulness. But do you have an encouraging word maybe for pastors and church workers?
Yeah. My encouragement really is uh, along the lines of remaining well and staying healthy, emotionally, spiritually, physically, all the rest of it. There are a number of things that I think of when I think about that. One of them, to your point, was, and I'm going to encourage you, Kirk, take your day off. Please set aside some time for yourself, and make sure that you protect that as best you possibly can. Throughout the course of my ministry, I'm not trying to hold myself as up as any big strong example or anything, but it was one thing I made sure I did one day a week. For a while it was Thursdays, then I did Fridays, ultimately I did Mondays, but it was always my day where I just kind of had it to myself, and really it helped me so much in terms of refreshment and all the rest. Along those lines, I would also say, I just think it's so good to have a morning routine of some kind. And for different people, that's different things. But in my life, one of the parts of my morning routine is the first thing I do when I get up is I go out and take a 6 mile walk. I go out, I get up early, I walk 6 miles, I listen to podcasts, I listen to encouraging things. It helps me physically, it helps me emotionally, it helps me spiritually. Just that exercise, that time outside, all the rest of that. And along those lines also is listening to podcasts or books or whatever that can be encouraging to you. I think that's so beneficial. There's so many different materials and podcasts out there like this one that you can listen to that can really help you and upbuild you and that kind of thing. And then, like I said, take your day off, make time for things that you enjoy, even if it isn't a whole day off. And whatever that might be, whether it's riding your bike or painting or writing or watching your favorite TV show or whatever. And then I will just close it with two different things. One, if you have a wife, make sure that you take a date night every week. And I'm serious about this. Every week, make sure that you set aside intentional time to develop your relationship with your wife and to devote that time to encouraging her and seeing to it that she is important to you as well, not just your ministry. And then finally, to the original point, I think that we started this whole thing off with, make sure that you have at least one trusted friend. And a lot of times for a lot of us in the ministry, it's somebody else in ministry, which I think is a good thing because they know what we're going through. They know what it's like to have certain pressures and certain difficult congregational members and, difficult meetings and different things like that. Just have somebody that you can confide in, that you trust, that you can actually talk to, and they will listen to you and be supportive and empathetic and helpful. I just think that's very, very important.
Yeah. No, that's really good. And I think that um, we can sometimes throughout, and I like how you said, even if it's not a full day, I think every day you should pause and do something that recharges you,
Yeah.
that doesn't make you, because we can get just so focused on the problems of the ministry or even the work of the ministry. It's not all problems that we can't take a break and take a breath. And so find that thing, like you said, that kind of recharges you. And here's the thing I always try to tell guys too: don't feel guilty for taking that time. Uh,
Right.
and that's I had a friend that just went on sabbatical for 2 months, and I said to him, I said, "No, don't feel guilty." And he goes, "Oh, I never feel guilty about that." I'm like, "Well, good. You need to teach other guys how to do that because that's important." I know that that's just a personal struggle I've had for years. Is like, well, if I'm golfing, one afternoon, I have an afternoon off. There's no appointments. I'm going to go play 9 holes, and I'm out there going, man, I feel guilty about this. So what I do is I try to find a church member or an elder that can go with me, so then I feel like it's ministry, right? Anyway, so but don't feel guilty about spending that time. Even our Lord and Savior, perfect Jesus Christ, got away. And to be
Right.
recharged, and again, he was still interrupted with things of the ministry, but that's a pattern for us that I think he gave to us. And always remember, you're not alone either. It's really important for us to understand that. And anything you're going through is somebody else has experienced that as well. And so don't think that it's only you that has to experience this. So Tom, thanks so much. I really appreciate the work that you do. If you guys get a chance, go on to the LCEF website, look at all the wonderful programs they have. You'll get Grace Place Wellness, through there as we work together to build the church up in love, and we can help the church flourish so that we can become mature as Paul encouraged us in Ephesians chapter 4 to do. And so if you like this, again, please like, share, subscribe. Also, if you have any questions or any needs, please reach out to me at Kirk, Kirk, at ppmhi.org. Anyway, have a blessed day. Thanks again, Tom.
Thank you, Kirk.